Ray says, I'm over 60 and am working full time. My plan at this stage is to work for another 3 to 5 years. What should I be doing about my super? Should I be organising transition to retirement strategy? Yes, in short, depending on your scenario. But if that's all I know, a transition to retirement strategy generally should be considered. Robert says, I have $160,000 in super. I was born in 1950. Do I need to keep working after I turn 65? Really, that gets down to how much money you need to live on. If you can live on the age pension and a little bit more from your super, then certainly you can retire at age 65, but it really gets down to how much you need to live on and how much over the age pension that you need to live on. Because if you've got $160,000 in super, and you're likely to get the full pension. And I guess the other thing is what age the age pension age is, because that's increasing. Yeah, that's probably what you're asking. If you're born in 1950, then your age pension age is 65. Yeah, so you'd get access to the age pension. So it really depends on whether you can live on the age pension, which is for a couple, it's about $28,000. They say a comfortable retirement for a couple is about $30,000, and they say a modest retirement is $30,000, and a comfortable retirement is about $53,000. So yeah, it really depends on what your scenario is there, Robert. David says, I want to retire at the end of 2012. What steps should I take to prepare financially? Well, big picture wise, it's paying down any debt first, and then looking at boosting your retirement savings. So getting as much money into super as possible, into that 0% tax environment. And the ways that you do that is that you take advantage of all those strategies that we've walked through this evening. So government co-contribution, spouse contribution, salary sacrifice, transition to retirement. You put all those together, and hopefully that enables you to boost your retirement savings just before you do actually retire. Looking at other areas, one of the interesting things about retirement that I see over and over again is that, particularly with men, it is actually a real challenge to retire, particularly if you've been working full-time for a long time. And you really need to either plan around, potentially having part-time work, or really replacing the work that you did in a significant way, whether that be through volunteer work. And I like to think of it in terms of rehirement instead of retirement. You're actually being rehired, whether that be in a paid capacity or a volunteer capacity, but you really need to be re-engaged or engaged in another way. So I really encourage you to do that. There's books written, I think, by a couple of Australian guys called Avoid Retirement and Stay Alive, based on the principle that you need to stay engaged, otherwise you do end up having a shorter life expectancy. In other areas, David also asks about, is entering a retirement village a good idea? Your suggestions would be appreciated. Financially, retirement villages are generally not beneficial, but it's not about finances with retirement villages. It's all about lifestyle. Had a client move into one last year and is very happy. When you look at the contracts and look at the way it's structured, generally property prices continue to go up, but when you're in a retirement village, you don't get to access, you don't get to benefit from that, or you get to benefit from it in a reduced way. So retirement villages are great from a social and community perspective, not generally positive from a financial perspective, but it really gets down to what's right for you. Rhonda had the question, my husband and I are 60, we have virtually no super except $350,000 we expect to get from the sale of a unit. Oh, this is the one I was talking about before. We own our own home. How can we invest this money? Is super or fixed deposits to maximise our investment super savings? Yeah, this is the scenario where this deductible contribution to offset the capital gain. So say, for example, Rhonda bought a property for, let's say, $150,000 10 years ago. and now it's worth $350,000. So there's a $200,000 gain there. If it was held jointly, they both held the property, then that $200,000 gain will be shared between them. Or before that, actually, they've held it longer than 12 months, so it's discounted by 50%. So it ends up being a $100,000 gain, and then it's split in two if it's held jointly, so that $50,000 will be added to each of their taxable incomes. So if they're in the 30% tax bracket, they'll be losing over 30% of that in tax, or if it's $100,000, it'd be $30,000 in tax. So it is beneficial if you can manage it to sell that property in a year where you've got either a low income or no income, and then you're able to make contributions to super as well to offset those gains. So there's some. If you haven't already sold the property and there is some flexibility to manage that, then you can potentially save tens of thousands in tax under that scenario. In terms of what's the best thing to do with it once you have sold it, well, firstly, try and get it into super in the most tax-effective way, and then secondly, decide how you're going to invest that money longer term. And the key thing there is deciding on an investment approach and not chopping and changing too much. People that change too frequently generally do it to their detriment. So it's about planning out how much volatility can you handle in your portfolio, what do I need to retire on, and setting that right investment option for you, and sticking to it for the longer term. John, my wife has no superannuation and has not worked paid for 30 years. Is there any benefit, indeed, is she eligible, in me contributing to super for her? That's the eligible spouse contribution that we talked about early, and yes, it is. That's if you're paying tax, John, then $540 can be saved if you contribute $3,000 to her account. Catherine says, please explain how pre-1983 contributions affect tax at retirement. Please show how an example of how the tax will change if I put a lump sum into my super prior to retirement. That is, proceeds from a property one of my super funds has not had contributions tax paid yet. Yeah, there's a few things to that question. So the whole pre and post 1983 contributions, that was changed a few years ago when I think the Costello, or Peter Costello as the Treasurer of the federal government, changed the whole super system to be what they call the simpler super. So rather than having the pre and post 1983 components, they converted into tax and tax-free components. It's better to have tax-free components because when you, on the event of your death, if the money's passed to a financial dependent, it doesn't matter. But if it passes to a financial non-dependent, then there's that 16.5% tax rate on the taxable component. So there's benefit in. There's a strategy we talk about in the retirement planning webinar called a cash out recontribution strategy, where you pull money out of super and you put it back in just to get access or just to change the components of your superannuation fund. And the main purpose of that is for estate planning purposes, so that if the money flows to a financial non-dependent, you're able to avoid that tax or reduce that tax at least. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'll answer that question, Catherine. So follow up with a question potentially via the podcast if I haven't answered that right. So the podcast you can access via 1300 275 428.